Ken Ife, of course, will be joining us. Tope, let's start with you, Tope.
All right, so the federal government says, despite going out of recession, I beg your pardon, according to the National Bureau of Statistics, the growth still remains fragile. Now, what do you think of this?
Yeah, I mean that's great, and the fact that the federal government itself has come forward to say, guys, let's treat this with cautious optimism, means that we're on the right track. 0.55% growth is not particularly very robust, as it were. And then again, by the time you begin to drill down to the figures, you begin to say, okay, where did this come from? A lot of that came from the oil industry. Oil prices have recovered from where they used to be to a certain extent, and there's been a bit of stability in terms of the price and daily output as a country, which is good, So I think we had about 11% growth in that sector alone. And then we had some growth in agriculture as well. But then if you look at that, you realize that, yes, we're doing a bit of off-season planting these days, dry season planting. But this is also the agricultural, this is the season of reaping and all of that, New products are coming out of the farms and so on. But again, there's been a bit of renaissance in the agri sector due to the policies of the government. Of course, sometimes it's good when economies go into recessions. People tend to think some of the biggest and the best companies in the world have been created in periods of recession, because actually that's the time when you think, So that's very important. However, again, we had quite a bit of recovery in the electricity sector, 35%. That's quite a bit, But then again, someone would say, when there's rainy season, the water levels are high, and of course, electricity seems to be doing well. But we should also give some kudos to the guys running that sector, particularly the minister. They've done quite a bit,
In terms of policies, what has the government done in terms of economic policies to achieve this growth?
I think part of it is what I was trying to discuss. There's been a bit going on in the agricultural sector. I think we have a serious minister there. And, what the government did, sometimes, like the government itself admitted that, listen, we made some mistakes in the past. Essentially, I think that what really deepened the recession was the mismanagement of the foreign exchange at some point. And by mismanagement, I mean that there was a time when the government felt, listen, we're not going to fund some sectors of the economy. And however, the sectors that they chose not to fund were very emotive, very emotive. If a mother has a child in Russia or Ukraine or somewhere studying in year 3, maybe with 1 year to go, and all of a sudden the child is thrown out on the streets in the cold, almost getting hypothermia, that mother will get money at any rate. And again, if people have loved ones that they needed to treat abroad, right, and buy money at any rate, Now what that now does is that rate becomes the reference rate in the economy. It doesn't matter what you're selling officially to manufacturers and what have you. That rate becomes the reference point. And so what we found at that point was a scenario where even to get the official funds, people had to pay premiums of up to 200 naira on each dollar in order to get the 305 from the CBN. And what that did was companies shrank. A lot of companies just closed down. A lot of people lost their jobs. And what is GDP? Now, I must say that GDP itself is a very flawed measure of economic growth. It's really flawed. It's flawed. It's weak. It's not very effective, especially for an economy like ours. Only that we like to report on GDP because the world reports on GDP. But if you ask me, number one, we have a very large informal economy, right? How much beer was drunk in Maraba yesterday? Who can tell? No one. So even established companies doctor the figures, not to talk of an informal economy. Where are you going to get the figures? So if GDP is actually the total summation of goods and services produced in monetary terms in an economy in a given year, which is what GDP is, you begin to question how good are the data, how good is the data? Where are we getting these numbers from? Are people coming to the table? So there are other measures of the economy which I personally have advocated that they should think about. And I think we should be brave enough to do that. For example, Human Development Index, which would measure how many people are in school, how many have access to good health, what is the longevity, how long do people live, you know, and those very important things that they drill down to what matters to us. Because people will tell you that, okay, we're out of recession. Recession is a GDP phenomenon, right? No, let me land.
Okay.
Just 1 second. Recession is a GDP phenomenon. If you're not measuring GDP, you cannot be talking of this recession or not. People will complain and say, we're out of recession. So what someone wrote yesterday, I went to the market, they seem not to know that we're in recession. I mean, we're out of recession and all of that.
Sorry, before I go to Professor, I just want you to touch base very quickly on this. When you talk about figures being doctored, are you now saying that the growth that was recorded and that was released by the MBS was doctored? Very quickly.
No, we're not. Well, who doctored what? That's what I'm saying. Number one, remember, what I'm saying is that we have a large informal economy, right? You can't tell a lot of what goes on. You can only estimate. And in economics, in statistics, when you estimate, you know, you have a huge error factor, right? And in economics, we spend too much time. We spend a lot of time trying to minimize the error term, to minimize the error factor, because we know in economics ab initio that when you're estimating anything that has to do with human nature, you can't predict it like science.
Okay.
You can't actually have a theory and say QED, I've proven it and it can never shake from where it is. So the real challenge we have is the MBS has to continue to gather good data, cleanse its data, refine its process, and actually convince Nigerians to step out and give the figures.
All right, still staying on the same topic. I mean, yesterday, it was a good news, so to speak. We've discussed about it earlier. But again, when you look at the unemployment figure is about 16.1 or 16.2%, compared to what we used to have in the first quarter of 18.34%. Now, how do we close this gap? How do we synergize the record that we made, the progress we've made in the GDP or in the recession, so to speak, 0.55%? How do we close that gap with the huge unemployment gap that we have?
Right. I'm going to come to that, but I think I need to tie up with what Mr. Fasua is saying. Is it GDP, the real GDP is the figure we are playing with. It was 573 billion in 2014. It dropped to 300. It's 350. That is the figure we are playing with. But there is GDP purchasing power parity. That has been consistently $1.1 trillion. And over the last 3-4 years, it's been going from 1.10, 1.11, 1.19. It's actually 1.12 trillion. Now, that figure is not lying. It actually measures whatever is going on in the economy. But there's a difference between the two. What they can capture and is official is what they can report. That's the real GDP.
Yeah, but I think
but what he's saying about people drinking, having a drink, or consuming a lot of fish in Mararaba and all that probably wouldn't appear, because it shows the divergence between those, shows you the level of informal economy that is at work. So the investors know, they know that the real size of this economy is being measured by $1.12 trillion. So that's why they're investing in your country, not because of what is going up and down, what is not going up and down.
So what about the informal sector? How do you capture that as well?
That's a different strategy. I don't want to spend too much of your time. But the thing is, if you produce gum in Nigeria, and it's local gum and we use it, it's only when it is being traded in the international market and is of the standard that you can, that's when you can actually capture that and put it in. And when others are prepared to buy it and you can sell it, and you can sell it freely and off standard. So that's it. Now, coming to the link between, it's like Buhari said. President Buhari says, I want to believe that this is going to make sense when you can connect it to unemployment, connect it to poverty reduction, and connect it to more food on the table. That's the essence of your question. The thing is there are progress, and we must recognize this progress because of foreign investors. They must see that confidence in us that our economy is recovering, so that domestic investors can invest and the foreign people can invest, and we can feel that we need to make a contribution. And when you're in a period of growth, that's when you should consolidate the growth, be more aggressive, because every little investment, marginal investment, produces more results. And the second thing I said in your previous interview is that three things that actually underpin this growth must be captured. One, there is a sustained attack by the CBN. There's monetary policy gain there. It could be better than more that could be done on the monetary policy. But actually, the attack on sector intervention has been sustained.
Like, so which
month
of the
by month,
sectors?
week by month. Agriculture is just one.
Are we talking about,
Yes,
what about infrastructure?
Agriculture is one. Infrastructure is receiving attention. It needs more money than we can give to it at the moment. Power has shown you something about power and a huge jump. And then even oil is surprisingly, for the first time, oil is 1.6. It's never heard of, going ahead of non-oil. Non-oil is only 0.45. So when you normalize, that's where you now come to 0.55 because there's more contribution, less than 10% contribution of the oil. So that's you normalize. But and of course, other area like manufacturing. Manufacturing is great because it from -7 just coming all the way to 1 point. It's a huge leap for the manufacturing. And all the collaborations at the PMI index has also been constantly growing for the last 5 months. And all the subsets of the PMI index are all growing together. So it's not like 2 or 3 influencing the figure. The same thing now, to come to your question, inflation is one thing that could have given you a measure of how well this is connecting to the base. But unfortunately, the food element of inflation is what is causing the problem. If you remove food, you look at the core index in inflation to 12.2. So if food wasn't there, our inflation would have been 12.2%. But food is 20.2%.
So that's what is causing the contraction.
That's what is causing the contraction. Now, let me explain why it hasn't, what the progress you are seeing in food, in the agriculture, has not reflected. It's because the Northeast region is one of the big regions of food production, and they still have the refugees. So they're not producing. And so they are somewhere being fed somehow. Then you have the fact that because our currency is now cheaper, very much cheaper, from 3 franc to $1 naira to now 1.54 franc to 1 naira, our food is very cheap. So all our surrounding neighbors, all the Francophone countries are taking our food, they're importing our food.
So why can't we lay embargo for now?
No, you can't stop them because we want to promote export. It's a different story. Are you getting dollars from that's a different story. We want to export, but we want to make sure that export activity, does something for us, creates employment. So the only way you do that is to make sure there is diffusion of primary processing facilities across the country. Not just have 1 or 2 industries, like you have one good one in Lagos processing rice, but the rice has to travel from KB. Good idea, but the thing is that the gain is lost because of transportation. Anything you transport from any part of the country to the other adds 100% to the price. So you lose the price advantage.
All right, hold your thoughts there. I really do not know what you make of his submission on some of this growth and how we can sustain the growth.
I mean, those are great submissions from Prof. There. Who am I to argue with Prof? So I mean, those are spot on. How can we sustain the growth? Like he said, it's a period of growth. Number one, the investor confidence that returns is very, very remarkable. No investor who doesn't know a lot about your economy is going to come in a period of recession because they're not quite sure how long it's going to be sustained. And like I was trying to explain earlier on, the recession actually basically came up because it actually translates to a loss of purchasing power. That was what happened, you understand, right? If people are losing jobs, then they're not going to actually be buying that drink that I'm talking about in Maraba. They won't be buying that, they'll be buying fewer. Now, Prof mentioned something that's very, very critical. Food inflation at 20%. Usually what happens in Nigeria when we have some of this kind of volatility, if you like, is that food inflation kind of spikes up to 50%. You go there and Gari per bowl has become maybe from 50 naira has become 100 naira. Take it or leave it. People must eat. So that's actually a key concern. One aspect I would like to take on Prof on slightly is the issue of, yes, we want to export, but if you look at the kind of, there was once that Garba Shehu, the government spokesman, actually said there were 500 trucks of grains leaving Nigeria on a weekly basis, and that we're going to suffer from famine. He actually said that. And of course, people took him up on that, but I actually tried to drill down. The real issue may not be that those grains are leaving Nigeria. Are they documented? Is there a NXP form open for that? There's something they call the NXP form, where you document export. I mean, our biggest issue is documentation. So, I mean, you know, let me also let you know, there's something that hacks down to the history of that place. In many parts of the northern Nigeria, where around the border, on this side is English-controlled Nigeria. On that side is French-controlled Nigeria. The houses, the huts are, you know, the line is probably, I mean, an invisible line. They don't understand the concept in those parts, in many of those parts, they don't understand the concept of modern nationhood. Muhammadu, you are Muhammadu. Your guy speaks French, I speak, we speak the same outside. They don't see anything wrong in taking from here and giving to the other side. So the real issue is this: if, apart from the issue of the refugee crisis, and of course a lot of displacement of people from their farmlands, that's the key issue, which worried me when the Boko Haram thing was raging. I felt, listen, what's going on here? We seem to be clearing a lot of people from their farmlands, and they're still there. Now they're being fed. That's one problem. The second issue is if grains are moving into Niger and Chad, and perhaps northern Cameroon, and then up to Mali. Up to Mali, are we documenting? Will we ever be able to document so that we can get the export proceeds back? Because you see, what government actually tries to do is that when you send anything out of Nigeria, they're also waiting for you, okay, 180 days, have you sent the money back? Because we need the dollars as well, sir. You understand? So that's the only thing. So if the trade was documented, great. If it's not documented, we're in trouble. How do we sustain this at the end of the day? Fine. Let us continue to leverage on the good news. As much as I believe in the, you know, optimism that government, I mean, cautious optimism they're talking about, I actually will not go out of my way to poo-poo this achievement. As much as GDP is a weak measure, and I've always said that, I would try and play it up because, hey, at the end of the day, when an economy is growing, and investors, both local and foreign, realize that the economy is growing, they bring out more money and invest in such an economy. So we can consolidate on it. We can tighten some of the leakages. I personally believe that we're not doing well in the area of fiscal discipline yet. A lot of money, well, as much as we're in the WTO, there are a lot, look, what the US government will do, or the UK government, they're the ones that we know, and they report their figures. When you're in recession, it's a total lockdown. Especially taxpayers' money must be spent on Nigerian goods to reflate the economy rather than send monies outside. We're still importing too much.
Yeah.
Okay, now, the Nigerian Senate has said that MBS's confirmation of the fact that Nigeria is out of recession shows that the 21 recommendation made in 2016 submitted to President Muhammadu Buhari was, you know,
By them.
Was adopted by him.
Everybody
all
rushes
right?
forward to claim the
To claim.
All right, so I would just go ahead and list out a few of the recommendations. He said that the release of looted funds to boost the economy were part of, you know...
They haven't started deploying the looted funds.
So the question is, what can the federal government do to see that the looted funds, you know, can be plowed back into the economy? Yeah. Would that make any difference?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, people are saying now, the doctors are on strike over pay. The university lecturers are on strike over pay. Someone actually worked it out and said, I think the alumni of University of Port Harcourt, you know, they said, listen, guys, you know, these monies that these lecturers are looking for which they have probably granted the entire universities in the country, is not even up to 1 year's budget for the National Assembly. It's not up to 100 billion or thereabout. If this is what it takes, of course, we know that the lecturers also have their own issues, you know. But if this is what it takes, look, why don't we deploy? Now, that's why legalism. I was on a show on NTA with the Attorney General, and the huge issue was this issue of what do we do with recovered loot. And I felt this thing, at the end of the day, I'm an economist, and as an economist, we're trained to think about everything, right? This thing has to go beyond legalism. Oh, you know, the money is blocked somewhere, we can't touch it. Listen, you got a crisis on your hands. Yeah, but now, if we can't daily be hearing about 500 billion is hanging somewhere, you know, and even these monies are not well accounted for. And you have a problem. If you have to do whatever they have to do to make sure they deploy, and then you must deploy it properly. If you deploy it now, while the crises are going on, you know, because at the end of the day, in my own head, it's debit plus credit. You understand? It's debit and credit. You have some money somewhere. It's legitimate money. There's nothing stopping you from deploying the money.
No, but of course,
and the economy is going down.
there must be a legislation on that money, because
No,
obviously...
we have to manage. Let me also let you know, they say the more the laws, the more the crime. This country has spent too much time rigmaroling around law and legislation and all of that, and getting little done. And of course, we're just basically playing into the hands of the big lawyers. You know, at the end of the day, that's my opinion. You know, so
Okay, I think there should be...
Beyond the law is morality. Beyond the law is exigency. Beyond the law is economics. Economics supersedes all of these things, but we seem to have subsumed economics and then elevated the law, and then everybody is now a slave to the law, and people now, you know, you machinate the laws and manipulate everybody around the so-called
Well, unfortunately, that's the situation that we have been able to find ourselves right now. But again, perhaps maybe the National Assembly, rather than jumping on the progress made by Nigeria, I think they should start looking at legislation that will bring out some of those looted funds so that you can plow back that into the economy. But let me come back to you, Prof. Yesterday, the economic advisor to the president, Mr. Yemi Dikpolu, said something, and I will quote. He said that overall, the end of recession is welcome, but economic growth remains fragile and vulnerable to exogenous shocks and, of course, policy slippages. Now, I want to go on that policy. Now, the federal government some time ago, you know, implemented what they call the Economic Recovery and Growth Plan. And perhaps, according to the economic advisor, that these are some of the things that was sustained, that is recording, you know, this growth month in or quarter by quarter basis. How do we ensure that this is kept in faith till perhaps the end of the year, till the first quarter or second quarter of 2018?
Right. Over the last 2 years, many development partners that came in says, well, they can't engage until we have a plan. They want to see a recovery and growth plan before they can engage, and rightly so. So by February this year, we'll launch the plan. And I can tell you, I've gone through those plans in detail. The plan is robust. Why? Because it's got all the players on the table. And it actually delivers macroeconomic convergence in terms of the trade policy, fiscal policy, monetary policy, investment policy, and industrial policy, all having a handshake. And that is this decisive difference between what has happened now and what we've been looking to happen over the last 20 years. Now you can see the impetus for the monetary policy to achieve the gain that it has achieved. Because it's now sitting, 2 years ago, everybody was missing in action. It was only CBN that was fighting. All the others were missing in action, but now they are all locked in. And you see it, when they went together to look for Eurobond, you saw the response. It was fantastic. Let them work together. It is missing. Now, coming to the plan, we are very good in releasing good plans. But you know what happens? The civil servants will come back after 6 months or 1 year, they want to review the plan. And that actually means policy upheaval. That is policy somersault. Policy somersault, or what they call slippages. What we need is, you look at that plan, it has 6 key sectors, 6 pillars. Actually 5+1, because social inclusion joined it. But going down, you see 60 policy action areas. But what I haven't found is, where are the performance indicators? Those 60 should give you at least 100 or 20 or 200 performance indicators. And then you have the National Planning Commission go out to measure. And every quarter they are giving us a monitoring report. Then me and you and everybody will interrogate every MDA and name and shame them when they're not delivering the goods. And that is where you build a solid foundation to actually prepare, to make sure that this thing delivers. It's a robust plan, but they will abandon it. Next year now, you won't hear about this plan. But when you have a monitoring framework that is measuring it, there will be pressure on everybody. Pressure on FIR to collect more money and then reduce the red line, because we are now in red line. Our debt service is more than 40% of the total revenue. Now that is red line. But down, they are waking up. Others have to. The customs will have to wake up. Custom, I don't know what they think they're looking for. Just implement a single window, and people will come back and use you and pay you more money. As long as those things are still there, they will be using Cotonou.
Okay. Finally, I just want to interject. Apologies. We know that this progress that was made or is being made is anchored on the fact that there's stability in the international market on crude oil sales, and also the crisis in the Niger Delta has been abated. Should we go back to maybe the time when we have crisis, we can sell more oil? What should we be looking at?
I don't agree. I may say in large part, yes. But if you look at the growth dynamics, many sectors have contributed to the recovery. It's not just oil.
No, but the non-oil
it's
sector
not just oil.
has 0.4%.
Yeah, the non-oil is 0.45%.
4-5%.
Oil just jumped from minus 50 to 1 point, but it's only
But it's still
less than
marginal.
10%.
It's still
less than
marginal.
10% of the GDP. But the fact is this: look at others. Agriculture is consistently high, around 3 to 4.
At 3.01.
Consistently. Then look at the power. You saw what happened with the power. Then you look at oil and gas. Oil and gas broken together, they're both jumping. Petrol price has gone down slightly. That's benefit to the community, yes. But they're jumping up. The jump up is not because of it's because there's structural adjustments going on in the oil industry. The PIB is facing acceleration. The minister has actually said by restructuring the PV that we could now expect to get $30 billion in the next 30 years. Now, that means that the cash call is not holding us to ransom. Now, they can now go and borrow money. So the structure is going on. They're going to do some on the offshore. But the fact is that the refiner, they've had the target to reduce the import of fuel to 60%. Dangote fuel is coming in next year. So there are things going on. You can see things that going on there. It's not business as usual. And then other solid mineral, you saw 6 solid people coming forward with license to start mining activity. So all of that manufacturing heavy recovery from -7%.
So what you're saying,
plus
what you're saying right now is
the
that
diversity. I want you to look at the diversity of the
diversity.
sectors that are recovering. And that is the basis of the diversification agenda that is encapsulated in the economic recovery plan. That is what is going to give you the resilience.
But I think our
in the
biggest
economy.
gain, sorry for interjecting again. I think our biggest gain was recorded in the oil sector.
Yes, but
Now,
it is not
I'm
by
just
any
saying.
means. It's not the program for sustaining the growth. The program for sustaining the growth and building more resilience in the economy is on consolidating these other sectors that are all jumping ahead. You would really have to make sure we underpin the growth by implementing that plan. That plan is robust.
Okay.
All right, I think we've exceeded time.
Because how interesting it is to people.
Yeah, thank you very
Thank
much,
you so much for joining.
Dr. Fasua, for coming. Economist based in Abuja, and of course, Professor Ken Ife also for joining us on the show this morning. And of course, we'll move on to other economic matters now.
To round up this, Nigeria's Economic and Financial Crimes Commission says that Chief Justice of Nigeria